This is Bendy. At the time, the introduction to a two-dimensional drawing had been kind of, well, I guess, cute. Though cute wasn't exactly a word I used too much in my day-to-day existence. But yeah, sure, cute. Nice to meet you, fictional character. But now, trying to explain to you what I understand about that moment, what I now know compared to what I knew then. I didn't know, for example, that when Mr. Drew smiled, you had to look close at his eyes to look for a small crinkle in the corner. Every artist knows that crinkle. It makes for a more authentic-looking smile. But I wasn't really an artist yet. Not then. Didn't know what I was missing. I didn't know, either, that an introduction could have so much meaning. That at a party, the way someone shook your hand or said their name, or even the way Mr. Drew introduced me to people. I didn't know then it was all a kind of code. Something to decipher. I wish I'd known right then that Mr. Drew had been waiting for a realization from me. Something to click inside and all come together. Watching me carefully. "Hi there, Bendy," I'd say, playing along. Mr. Drew laughed and put the picture down. "So you really don't know him, do you?" he asked. I shook my head no, because I didn't. "That's unfortunate," said Mr. Drew, but more to himself than to me. That much I recognized, so I didn't say anything. The thing is, Mr. Drew thought I should know who Bendy was, and I bet a lot of folks would ask themselves the same thing. Why didn't I know? After all, he was in those little short movies before the feature-length movie. There he was in the soup cans. The little devil sold war bonds, for crying out loud. I know. It's not like I haven't seen him before. Like I wrote earlier, I did have this feeling of recognition. So it wasn't that. Just when you're on the Lower East Side growing up, going to school, and then dropping out to make money. When your experience of the movies is Don Miller holding open the back door of a cinema for you. You just don't see cartoons as much as the average kid. If Bendy were still a running comic strip by the time I started drawing, that would be different. Those things were my whole world. It wasn't anyone's fault. It was being poor's fault. Trying to do right by my mom and working 12 hours a day. And let's be honest here, those cartoons weren't exactly popular the way they had been. I was barely in the world when the Bendy tunes were all the rage, so the little devil wasn't a big deal. He didn't represent anything. He didn't mean anything. Except he meant everything to Mr. Drew. "This is my point. This is my whole point," he said, standing up and pacing about the room. He still wasn't talking to me, but he was talking louder, and I couldn't just ignore it now. "Sorry, sir, what's your point?" I asked. He looked at me but kept pacing. "What is this studio coming to? What have we come to that a kid your age doesn't know Bendy? That's my point. That's why." He still wasn't making sense. It was kind of crazy that a few sentences that made sense could still sound like total nonsense. "You like that, Dot. I know you like that kind of stuff. The funny wordplay stuff. I hope I'm making you proud. I hope you're reading this. I hope you're alive." Where was I? Right. "Oh, okay," I said. I didn't know what else to say at this point. There was silence. He stopped pacing. I stopped talking. Then he clapped his hands together loudly, sharply. The sound made me jump in my seat. It's like a gunshot. I nearly ducked. This has always stayed with me. Out of all the memories that are getting mixed up in here, in this brain, in this head, this for some reason just sticks out. Right then when he clapped, the lights came back on. It was like they were waiting for him. It was like he was in control of them. He wasn't, but I made the connection back then. Somehow it made sense to me that maybe, just maybe, he had the power to do that. But he didn't. And he doesn't. Don't let anyone make you think he does. Mr. Drew noticed the light and laughed a ha! Exactly how you'd spell it. Like that. Ha! He turned to me and was smiling again. "Come on, I'll give you a tour, kid." I nodded and all the strange thoughts I'd had in that short moment disappeared. I was excited now. I was getting a tour of a studio that made cartoons. I was going to meet other artists. This is not at all how I pictured my day when I woke up that morning. "Great!" I was up in a flash and following Mr. Drew out of his office and into the now brightly lit foyer. A woman was sitting behind the desk next to the door. She was compact-looking, with jet black hair formed into perfect curls. "We're going on a tour, Miss Rodriguez," announced Mr. Drew as he passed her. "Tom's here," she replied, not looking up from her typewriter. Sure enough, there was a tall, broad man sitting in one of the chairs near the elevator. He had one leg folded neatly over the other, holding his hat in his lap. Next to him was what looked like a yellow tool bag with the word Ghent written on it. I glanced at Mr. Drew and saw a smile flicker, kind of how lights do before they go out. Then it grew larger, and he pointed at the man and said, "Tommy Connor!" It wasn't a question. The man stood, picking up a long, narrow cardboard tube that had been sitting beside him on the chair. Mr. Drew noticed it and pointed at the tube, but didn't say anything. Then he smiled bigger. "Yes, sir," said Tom, even though there hadn't been a question. "It is." What was? "Sorry about that, buddy. Gotta take this meeting. Big plans, kid. Big plans," said Mr. Drew. "Come back first thing when we'll get you settled in." He didn't look at me, but he gave me a firm pat on the back as he extended his arm towards his office. "Right this way, Tommy." "Mr. Connor," replied Tom as he walked over. Mr. Drew just laughed at that, though I didn't get the joke, and they went back to his office, closing the door behind them. I was alone then. I walked up to the secretary. She didn't look at me. I didn't expect her to at this point. I also didn't know what to say. "What did he hire you for?" asked Mr. Rodriguez. "A gopher. Maybe an artist. He said I'd be in the art department." I wasn't so sure anymore what exactly my job was going to be. Mr. Rodriguez stopped typing and leaned back, looking down at her desk. She pulled open a drawer and grabbed a thick envelope full of papers. Finally, she looked at me as she handed it my way. "Fill these out. Bring them with you tomorrow. Come by at 9 a.m. and check in with Miss Miller downstairs in the lobby." I took the paper and nodded. "Thanks." Miss Rodriguez looked at me for a moment longer, like maybe she wanted to say something. But she didn't. She just went back to typing. I didn't go home right away. First I had to see Mr. Schwartz, let him know the delivery was made and Mr. Drew was pleased with the suit. Then I had to quit. Which, well, didn't go too great. I didn't really care how red in the face Mr. Schwartz got, or how hard he pointed his finger at me. I was going to work tomorrow morning at Joey Drew Studios, and no one was going to stop me. The only thing that scared me was Mr. Schwartz might take it out and Ma might fire her. But he didn't. Ma was too good. I wish sometimes she'd just start a shop of her own. Well, maybe now. Maybe when I was earning enough. When I was a paid artist for Joey Drew Studios. I grinned at the thought. I wasn't ready to go home yet after that. I was buzzing with excitement. Wandered a bit through the neighborhood. Got a free donut from Miss Panic as she was closing up the deli, and the Janowaski kids tried to get me to play stickball with them. I smiled and kept going and made it eventually to the East River as the sky was turning a dark purple. The lights were on in Brooklyn. They looked like stars across the river. I sat on a bench, almost in some pigeon crap, but I saw it at the last minute and jumped my bum to the side. The air was less stagnant by the water, and it was cooler now with the sun almost set. It made me feel kind of calmer than I had been. The vibrating excitement of the day was now settling around me like a blanket. I still felt happy, but it all felt a lot more real. Sometimes things like that happen. I got home late. Real late. The hall I was on, which was nice of Ma, but I knew I had to shut it off immediately behind me. Lighting bills get high, and then Ma has to work more. I hope now with this new job, maybe the lights wouldn't be as big of a problem. Maybe now she could sit up and read comfortably and not with a candle. I also knew I'd probably get some speech the next morning about being out so late. She'd like to know where I was, like I was a kid or something. Well, it wasn't my fault for losing track of time. It had been a big day. I opened the door as slowly as I could. Ma slept on the daybed in the sitting area, right there by the entrance. It was all one space, the kitchen, where we ate, where we sat. And the door opened right into all of it. She was curled up under the sheet, dead asleep, and I slipped out of my shoes, carrying them to my room. My room was never actually pitch black. It's funny, but up until this day, standing in the dark lobby of Joey Drew Studios, it never occurred to me that there could be different types of dark. It never occurred to me that the street lamp outside our windows made it possible for me to find my bed, toss my clothes into the corner, and crawl under the sheet in my shorts without crashing into everything. It never occurred to me that it could be so black that you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. Back then, I didn't know about that kind of dark. I threw the sheet off and laid on the bed for a moment, trying to get cool. I got up and opened the window a crack. There wasn't much of a change in temperature. There was something soothing about the humming of the city. I lay back down and closed my eyes. Sometimes you don't know you've fallen asleep. That's what happened then. I thought I was still awake trying to fall asleep when I realized I wasn't lying in bed anymore. Everything was still black like when you close your eyes, but I was standing in it and my eyes were open. I was trying to see something, but couldn't. So I walked forward into the blackness. There was something ahead of me. I could hear it. Something breathing, maybe? but for some reason I didn't know if it was alive. I think I still thought I was awake at this point, because I thought to myself, you don't have time for this, you have to sleep. But I kept going forward. Finally, I came to a door. It just kind of materialized in front of me. I wasn't surprised. There was a knock coming from the other side. This made me take a step back. I felt like I shouldn't answer. I took another step back. Somehow the door was still right in front of me. There was a long silence. A giant hand burst through the wood, creating a shower of splinters. There was a roar as I stumbled back, but I couldn't get away. It kept grabbing at me, waving around, trying to find me. I woke up suddenly, face down on my pillow. The bottom sheet was drenched in sweat. My heart was in my throat. It was a dream, I told myself. A dream. I rolled over onto my back and stared at the slice of light from the street lamp as it highlighted the ceiling. There was that crack that ran across the corner of the plaster. Water damage. It had bled dark brown at once upon a time, and the stain made it look like the Hudson River. Dark, cold, filled with all kinds of who knows what. Why couldn't I shake the feeling that I was being watched? I glanced to my right. A thin figure stood in my doorway. He glowed in the lamplight. A pale, gaunt face, paper-thin skin stretched over his skull. Eyes wide and soulless, a long white nightshirt covering his skeletal frame. All I could do was stare, breathe, shake the dream out of my brain. He's not real. Wake up and he'll disappear. But he just kept standing there. He didn't move. He raised his hand slowly and pointed at me. That's when I just couldn't take it anymore. I closed my eyes and yelled. Maybe it was cowardly, but I couldn't move. I yelled again. My whole body was yelling. The lights buzzed on. The one over my head did its threatening flicker, the wiring in the walls damaged by the water leak above. Buddy, are you okay? Ma came charging into my room, struggling to pull her pale purple housecoat on even as the right sleeve was trapped under the belt. I normally laugh, but the terror was still in charge, especially as, even though the lights were now on and the dream long gone, the old man was still there, and he looked pretty much just as scary. I couldn't answer her, obviously. Couldn't make the words. The figure turned to my mother, took a step towards her. That helped me find my voice. You stay away from her! I called out, and leapt from my bed. My foot got caught in the hole at the bottom of the knit blanket dragged across the edge of the bed, and I fell face first onto the floor. My goodness, what's going on? Ma said. I was reaching for anything to help pull myself up. I felt like a fool. Pushed myself onto my forearms. A bony hand extended towards me. Up? Said a rich, low voice with a thick accent I recognized all too well. I turned my head and stared at the man. His features seemed too pale and too worn, and his eyes were a light blue and had a spark to them, no longer hollow. I reached out and took his hand. It was warm. I stood and stared at him for a moment. We were about the same height. He was maybe an inch shorter. He seemed now more frail than frightening. I looked at Ma. She'd managed to get her arm through the sleeve and was staring at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. But on the other hand, who's the old guy? I asked, pointing just to make sure she knew what I was talking about, since she seemed so confused, and to me it didn't seem like a confusing situation. Ma closed her eyes for a moment and smiled. She sighed as she opened it up again. The old guy is your daddy. My what now? Your grandfather, buddy. My father. The words caught in her throat just a little bit. I looked at the old man. He didn't smile. He didn't say anything. Just stood staring in that way he had been, framed by the doorway. What's he doing here? Look, I'm taking him to bed. I'll come back and we can talk, she said. She murmured something to him in Polish, and he nodded. She took him by the crook of the arm and led him out of my room. I sat on the bed. It was the first time all day I finally felt tired. Not excited because of Mr. Drew, or terrified because of a person who was evidently my grandfather. Just very tired. Ma came back and sat next to me. She gave that sort of sideways glance she was so good at, and then she thought I was funny. But it wasn't exactly her laughing at me, because I wasn't not laughing at me either. I'm sorry. I didn't know. How could I have known? I asked. It's okay. It was my fault. Everything happened so quickly. I didn't know he was coming today. I wasn't even ready for him myself. At least I didn't put him in your bed. Imagine what kind of shock that could have been, she said with a laugh. My bed? You've got the big bed, buddy, and we're just going to have to make it work for a while. I sighed hard but didn't say anything. My ma was a nice, warm kind of person. But don't let that fool you. You didn't argue with her. You never win. When you didn't come home, I put him with me tonight. Didn't want to scare you. Yes, that was nice of you, I said, feeling sorry for myself. Wasn't it? Said Ma with a wink. And where were you so late? You didn't think of your poor mother at home, worried sick? I didn't think it was time for a change of subject yet. I still didn't have enough information. My grandfather from the old country was now here in my apartment in New York. And why? The why still hadn't been addressed. But it was late. And also the answer would make her happy. Got a job, I said, trying not to smile, trying to make it a casual sort of thing, like I really didn't care that much. What about Mr. Schwartz? She said, biting her lip. Don't worry, he didn't get mad. You still have your job, but I hope as soon you won't have to work for him either. This job is better. It's working as an apprentice for Joey Drew Studios. Who knows where it could lead? You get paid for that? Of course, twice as much even. Ma smiled then, a small smile. Maybe I wasn't meant to even see it, but I could tell something in her had relaxed, and that made me so proud. What's the Joey Drew Studio? She asked, turning to face me, one knee up on the blanket. It's where they make cartoons. Bendy cartoons. I get to be a gopher, but I also a drawing apprentice. Learn stuff. She looked at me funny then, but that wasn't unusual. She always looked at me funny, like there's a whole story going on in her head that I never get to hear. Secrets. She smiled again. So you get to draw, and get paid for it. It wasn't a question. Yeah. And your grandfather arrives on the same day you get this job. Sure, I said. Perfect, she smiled. I didn't get the connection. Of course, she didn't explain it. I didn't ask either. It's funny. I'm just starting to realize how much I didn't ask questions back then. Not until I met you, Dot. Well, I'm happy for you, buddy. She leaned over and kissed my forehead. Made me feel like a little kid. Now, get some sleep. We'll talk about everything tomorrow. That made me feel even more like a little kid. She left and turned out the light, and I crawled back under the covers, and only then did I remember my dream. I wondered how loud I'd been to make that old man wake up and come in. I'd wonder if I completely embarrassed myself when my creepy grandfather looked like a ghost. What a strange day and night. If I had any sort of kind of superstitious sense of anything, I might have seen it as a sign. Something beginning, something not quite right. Of course I didn't. I never saw the signs until I was past them, then the dark road with no exit. Another metaphor. That one wasn't bad. Hey Dot, I'm getting better at this.